Hi friends, welcome to this latest episode of the Nationalist View, and today we have with us our special guest, Dr. Michael Rubin. Dr. Rubin, thank you so much for taking time out from your busy schedule.
Oh,
And
thank you so much for having me, Arun.
Dr. Rubin is a senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute and director policy at Middle East Forum. He's a prolific writer, and today we are going to talk about one of the articles which he has written recently. And Mr. Rubin, you wrote an article. Dr. Rubin, you wrote an article, very interesting article, that Bangladesh is on the way to become next Afghanistan. So, if you could elaborate a little bit upon that. And this article has been published in Middle East Forum and Washington Examiner. We will be sharing the link in the YouTube description box for our viewers also, so that they can read it. So, Dr. Rubin, could you elaborate upon this?
Look, my main concern in writing the article is that Muhammad Yunus is either maliciously or through his naivete providing a cover for Bangladeshi groups, especially militant groups that arrest journalists, that purge minorities, that openly swear allegiance to the Islamic State, to transform Bangladesh into a safe haven. The reason I compared it to Afghanistan wasn't necessarily Afghanistan in the year 2025, but after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Pakistan, which became the main channel for logistical assistance to the Mujahideen, deliberately starved resources from any group that was more moderate and instead favored the so-called Peshawar 7. And so within a matter of months, the entire character of the opposition to the Soviets in Afghanistan became very, very Islamist. Now, of course, Bangladesh isn't dealing with an invasion, but the end result seems to be the same thing when Muhammad Yunus, the chief administrator, is giving a carte blanche to Jamaat-e-Islami and various other groups to run roughshod over society. Now, look, it's all well and good to criticize Sheikh Hasina and her record leading the Awami League, but we have to recognize that what is replacing Sheikh Hasina after last August is actually just as dictatorial, but far less tolerant.
Dr. Rubin, how the United States is looking at this situation? Because you have talked about in your article that when the Afghanistan happened, the situation got worsened in Afghanistan. So both the Democrats and the Republicans, they had dropped the ball. So in this part of the world, the general perceptions was that the regime change in Bangladesh happened with the covert U.S. support, with the deep state of U.S. And so this was a general perception, especially in India, if I tell you. So, but now when the Trump administration took over, and then there was also a lot of conversations which were happening around, dismantling the U.S. deep state. So, currently, how the Trump administration is looking at it? Are they really seized of this matter? Though Tulsi Gabbard, she recently came to India and she spoke about it in one of the podcasts also. So, how do you look at Trump administration looking at it?
Well, look, it's a great question. Now, first, just because there's rumors out there, and frankly, in India, there's always rumors that the initial August protests were caused by the CIA, the deep state, and so forth, doesn't make it true. And look, having worked in the United States on the inside, and admittedly in the defense ministry, in the Pentagon, not in the intelligence community, um, the one thing that I'm absolutely certain of with regard to the United States is we're simply not that competent. We're not that directed. The expression, of course, in American English is you get to see how the sausage is made, and it's not a pretty sight. In this case, Bangladeshis have agency when it comes to supporting global Islamist groups, Deobandi groups, Muslim Brotherhood groups. I'm much more concerned about what British intelligence does, frankly, than what the Central Intelligence Agency does. Now, when it comes to what happened in August, and again, Bangladeshis have agency. They were the ones that sparked their own protests. They were the ones that forced Sheikh Hasina to step down. You've got a situation in which, look, realistically, Bangladesh seldom figures on Washington's mindset. Seldom does Bangladesh even make it to the presidential daily brief that the CIA provides to whomever the president is every day. It's the president's special newspaper that only the president and the vice president can access. You've got a situation now, however, that people are starting to become concerned in Washington about Bangladesh. Look, maybe Muhammad Yunus can whisper sweet nothings into the ears of the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, and he can use his laurels as a former Nobel Peace Prize winner. But we're starting to hear mumblings that, something's not right in Bangladesh. And the more Muhammad Yunus lets Jamaat-e-Islami run roughshod over the country, the more this is actually people in the United States are starting to wake up to this. And we saw that, as you were saying, with Nikki Haley's trip. We've seen this with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, mentioning Bangladesh. We're aware of what's going on, and the situation isn't getting better. Look, whenever you put Jamaat-e-Islami in charge of anything, it doesn't matter who the figurehead is. The result is going to be a Talibanization of society.
You've also talked about, that Al Qaeda actually would be seen as a more moderate voice if we compare to the kind of radical Islamist groups and the Islamic terrorist groups are coming up in Bangladesh. So, if you could, talk a little bit more about that, because the extent of danger is still not probably it has not percolated down, the policy czars across the world. So if you could talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, well, first of all, suggesting that Al Qaeda can be sort of even a more moderate force than what we're seeing, the analogy there is like dying of a heart attack versus dying of a stroke. The fact of the matter is the end result is the same. What I was trying to get at, however, is in Afghanistan, when Al Qaeda really set roots in the country because of the Taliban. And again, make no mistake, the Taliban had the same sponsors in the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency that Bangladesh's Jamaat-e-Islami has. But once Al Qaeda sank its roots into Afghanistan, we saw the situation, for example, on September 11th, 2001. They still managed to reach out and attack New York and Washington. Previously, they attacked Kenya and Tanzania and so forth. We don't need to go through all that history. What I was trying to argue in the article is that if Bangladesh transforms into a terror haven, and make no mistake, whether it's because Muhammad Yunus has a personal beef with Sheikh Hasina, and this is all playing out because of his fragile ego, or perhaps he really is that naive, whatever. Once Jamaat-e-Islami takes over, once you have these various Islamic State-related groups, these groups related to Lashkar-e-Taiba, groups like Jamaat-ul-Mujahideen Bangladesh, and so forth, once they take root in Bangladesh, it's 10 times more dangerous than Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Because say what you will about Afghanistan, it was landlocked. It was a little bit harder to operate. But when you have a dense urban jungle, and I've been to Bangladesh, I've been to Dhaka, I've been to Chittagong, and so forth, it's much harder to extricate terrorists from that sort of urban jungle than it is from relatively isolated villages or cave networks. On top of which, Afghanistan again was isolated. To get out of Afghanistan, you'd have to go through Uzbekistan, which managed to secure its borders, Iran, which was also on high alert, Pakistan, which was complicit, and so forth. But because Bangladesh has its opening to the Bay of Bengal, basically, if Bangladesh transforms into a terror base, within 24 hours, those terrorists can be anywhere in South Asia, Southeast Asia. Another 24 hours, they can be anywhere in the world. It's 10 times more dangerous than what we had in Afghanistan when the Taliban and Al-Qaeda truly controlled that state.
How do you look at, you mentioned about, Pakistan's ISI. There have been, a lot of proximity between the Yunus regime and between ISI and the Pakistani armed forces. The generals have visited Bangladesh. There's a lot of arms which are getting exported to Bangladesh now, and there's a lot of concern in India also about this thing. And ISI is notoriously known for nurturing the Islamic terrorist groups. How do you? But surprisingly, because the people again here in this part of the world feel that, and this needs a lot of clarification from your side because you can bring in a perspective on this. It is considered that US has a considerable influence on Pakistan. So when Pakistan's ISI seems to be backing up the Islamic terrorists, the Islamic radical groups in Bangladesh and Islamic radicalization in Bangladesh. So how do you look at this situation? Why US is not
I
using
wish,
influence? Yeah, please.
Arun, I wish the United States had as much influence on Pakistan as you suggest. The fact of the matter is, Pakistan always plays a double game. And when Americans trust Pakistan, the fact is, Americans come home in body bags. We saw that with regard to what happened in Afghanistan and so forth. 90% of the precursor chemicals for improvised explosive devices came from one of two Pakistani factories. And if Pakistan wanted to close that down, they could have. What I look going forward when it comes to Bangladesh, and I'll be writing on this a little bit later, is I'm reminded of 1983. When I was growing up, I was still in grade school, and I woke up one day to see that the United States had invaded the Caribbean island of Grenada. Why did the Reagan administration invade Grenada? It was because there really was Cuban Soviet infiltration onto the island. At the height of the Cold War, the Cubans, the Soviets were trying to transform Grenada into a launching pad to basically attack, theoretically, the United States. Rather than allow that to happen, the Reagan administration preempted the threat. And as a result, the Cubans and the Soviets were thrown out of Grenada. Now, it's not an easy comparison, but the fact of the matter is, I wonder, rather than asking Washington what to do, whether New Delhi has to consider Bangladesh to be its Grenada. If New Delhi allows the ISI, if it allows Jamaat-e-Islami to take over Bangladesh in the way they're doing after this coup against Sheikh Hasina, whatever her faults, then ultimately the situation is going to be far worse for India. And with all due respect to Prime Minister Modi, it's the job of any democratically elected leader to protect his own people first, to protect his own national security first, regardless of what Muhammad Yunus's friends may say.
Yunus is also going to China in the next few days, and he seems to be quoting China quite prominently. Do you think that it's going to make the situation worse in Bangladesh?
Look, I mean, whether it's Sri Lanka, whether it's the Maldives, whether it's Bangladesh, whenever you have any of these regional leaders go to China, it always makes the situation worse. It makes the situation worse, not just in terms of regional security, but also for their own people. I mean, take a look at Pakistan. And I've been in the National Defense University in Islamabad. I've seen the big posters there for the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. But the fact of the matter is that because of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, you Pakistan is now 38 to 40 billion dollars in debt. All the promises which China made didn't come true. You know, maybe Muhammad Yunus was very good at microcredit, but when it comes to leading a state, I mean, he's a babe in the woods. He's as naive as can get, and he is basically providing cover for a real tragedy inside Bangladesh. Essentially, he was put in power by a coup, and he shouldn't have the legitimacy on any normal day. But we shouldn't be silent as he betrays Bangladesh to the Chinese and to the Islamists.
So, what do you think? What's the Pakistan's play in Bangladesh? Is it? I'll
Look,
tell you.
I,
There are two theories basically, which are there are two perspectives on this. One perspective is I spoke to a number of analysts that Pakistan ultimately wanted to take a revenge of the 1971 war defeat with India, and especially the formation of Bangladesh, because that was a big blot on Pakistan's military establishment's face. So they are, it's like it's a 360 degree, it's kind of a full circle that now they are turning Bangladesh into kind of a protege of a terror protege of what you call Pakistan. The other theory is that they are, of course, basically the prime target is not to take revenge from Bangladesh, but the prime target is basically to target India through Bangladesh. So, how do you look at what's the Pakistan's play in Bangladesh?
The answer to that question, your either or question, is a simple yes. They're doing both of it. Now, I've had the privilege of traveling in India a bit, but I've also had the privilege of traveling in Pakistan quite a bit, in in the Northwest Frontier Province, as it was then called, in Peshawar, in Islamabad, in Pindi, and so forth. And the fact of the matter is, when I compare my time in both countries, what I see is Pakistan is uniformly obsessed with India. For every Pakistani strategic thinker, it's a zero-sum game. I mean, for us to win, India has to lose. Now, when I'm in India, what I hear is about the tech developments in Bangalore. I hear about the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. I hear about the new infrastructure which Prime Minister Modi has implemented across the region. I hear real discussions about traffic, about pollution. The point of this is when I'm in India, I hear about how to make India better, how to make India that third largest global economy, and so forth. I don't hear the type of sick, myopic obsessions that I get when I'm in Islamabad or in Pindi. And therefore, I mean, Indians need to recognize, and this is a problem the United States has too, with all due respect, that when we are so consumed with our own political debates, our own problems, trying to make our country better, we forget that there are enemies out there that have a singular focus on bringing us down and will do anything possible to make that happen. So in this case, Bangladesh is a tool for Pakistan to exact its revenge and to attack India, and India shouldn't forget it.
So one last question, Dr. Rubin. You have spent time in Afghanistan on ground also, and you have been to Bangladesh also. Do you think that the society as such, like in Afghanistan, the sense which I have is that a large section of the society had been actually radicalized. Whereas in Bangladesh, I might be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong when you answer this question. Is it only a part of the establishment which is kind of preparing a fertile ground for breeding of Islamic terrorism? Or is it largely the Bangladesh society predominantly has got radicalized? So, and it is also kind of basically, supporting that movement because we have seen the kind of attacks which happened on Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, and other minorities.
Okay, look, it's a great question. When I was first in Bangladesh, Bangladeshis referred to Jamaat-e-Islami as war criminals because of what they had done in 1971 on behalf of Pakistan and their complicity in the Bangladeshi genocide that Pakistani forces were trying to implement. However, you have groups like Khalifati Majlis, Allah Hardal, Ali Hadith, Andalun, Bangladesh, and so forth, which all now coalesce under Hifazati Islam to try to establish Islamic law throughout Bangladesh. Now, I would say that it's not too late, that they haven't truly been able to brainwash the newest generation of Bangladeshis. I mean, I think what's more analogous is to what happened in 1979 in Iran. And of course, I understand the difference between Shiism and Sunnism. But what we often forget when it comes to the Islamic revolution in Iran is that it wasn't just a Shiite revolution. It wasn't just an Islamist revolution, a theocratic revolution. It was enabled by students. It was enabled by students who weren't necessarily prone to Islamism, but believed the rhetoric of Ayatollah Khomeini, who was willing to say, I have no interest in personal power. That's a direct quote. that all I want is an Islamic democracy without ever defining what an Islamic democracy actually was. We now see what it was. The fact of the matter is that the Islamic Revolution in Iran was as much a leftist revolution as it was an Islamic revolution. And this was where the philosophy of Shariat Madari and Shariati and so forth came in. What we see in Bangladesh was the anger that we saw with regard to the quotas that coalesced into the student protests and so forth being hijacked by Jamaat-e-Islami. There's a parallel here to what we saw in Egypt with the Arab Spring, where there was real protest, real anger against Hosni Mubarak, against the lack of democracy in Egypt, about the interference of the Egyptian military in the Egyptian economy. And so when you had the Arab Spring, it was a reaction to that, but then you had the Muslim Brotherhood being the most organized and hijacking the movement. Now, I can only hope that what happens in Bangladesh will be what happened in Egypt, where the public, before it was too late, realized that the Islamists were hijacking their movement for the sake of a new dictatorship and reversed it before that Islamist dictatorship could come to fruition. So I've made comparisons perhaps to Grenada. I'll also make comparisons to Egypt, and perhaps Egypt provides the best way forward, that the Bangladeshi people have to recognize that they are being used, that there's no difference between Mohammed Morsi and Mohammed Yunus, and that if they don't succeed, then perhaps a Grenada solution is needed.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin, for taking out time and bringing in this perspective. And we'll be back soon with another issue and another conversation. And we hope to have Dr. Rubin back on our podcast very soon. Thank you, Dr. Rubin.
Thank you.